Hello there, fellow denizens of the internet. My name is Chase Taylor DM, and I make Dungeons & Dragons videos every week. This episode, I'm going to be talking about goblins and the place that they have in Dungeons & Dragons, how to run them fun and effectively, and provide you a custom goblin that you can use to spice up your campaign a little bit, and a few Roll20 tokens if you do happen to play Dungeons & Dragons on Roll20.net. Goblins. These small creatures are a staple in Dungeons & Dragons and are very commonly the first creature that new players are pit against as an introduction to the game. They derive their power from working in large groups, driven by greed and malice. They are neutral evil, which means they generally do nefarious things for the betterment of themselves. They tend to be cunning in battle and cruel in victory. Despite their ruthlessness, they will commonly slack at their duties, such as guarding the front door of their hideout or pillaging a town. The first thing that I want to talk about, and the thing that was actually the most interesting to me as I finally did research on goblins and I didn't know before, is that they actually have a caste system. They have a hierarchy that determines where certain goblins rank up against others. Let's go ahead and start at the bottom and work our way up. At the very bottom are Pariahs. Pariahs are the lowest of the low in the goblin caste system. They're the ones that are incredibly dim-witted, that are extremely weak. There's really not much to say about them other than the fact that they usually serve as servants or slaves, doing a lot of grunt work for those a little bit higher up in the caste system. Next up on the totem pole are gatherers. Now you may be able to guess from the name that gatherers are the ones who go out into the goblins' territory and find sort of natural resources that they can harvest and take back to eat, to use with the rest of their goblin tribes. They typically aren't armed. If they are, it's usually with like a small knife or dagger. So if a random adventuring party runs into a group of gatherers, they're probably going to run because they don't really have the armaments or the skill set to fight. The ones who do have the skill set to fight are next up on the hierarchy, which is the hunters. Hunters are the ones who typically scout ahead. They're the ones who set up ambushes out on sides of roads and pathways. They're the foot soldiers. They're the ones who actually fight. They're the ones who go out and set out traps and collect large game, which that game could be, even in some rare cases, people. The hunters typically are the ones who you would see riding atop of wolves or even wargs. Next up on the hierarchy is Lashers. They essentially are the enforcers of the goblin people. If I had to give an example of like their place in relation to like any sort of developed civilization of humans, dwarves, elves, they're kind of like the noblemen of the goblin people. They are the ones who have the strategic minds, are the one who build traps, they're the one who tame the beasts like rats, wolves, and wargs. They're the ones who forge weapons. They do a lot of the things that require a little bit more finesse than you would see just like some of the gatherers or the hunters doing. The things that usually require a little bit more intellect, that's handled by the Lashers. But as you can tell by the name, they're the ones who also do the lashing when it needs to be done. And then up at the top of the goblin hierarchy is the goblin boss. Now the goblin boss is usually determined by, well, who's the biggest, baddest mofo in there, and it can also be whoever is smartest, because a cunning mind can usually beat strong warriors. If you're able to work around your opponent's weaknesses, you don't have to just brute force your way through them. But at the true top of the hierarchy system is the goblin's god, Maglubiet. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's kind of spelled weird. So, Maglubiet. We're going to go ahead with that pronunciation. It is the god of goblinoids, referred to as the Mighty One. And oddly enough, this is not a god that they worship out of respect or out of some sort of a deeper understanding for their god. It's because they actually fear Maglubiet. And to quote something actually directly out of the monster manual, he is worshipped not out of adoration, but fear. Goblins believe that when they die in battle, their spirits join the ranks of Maglubiet's army on the plain of Acheron. This is a privilege that most goblins dread, fearing the Mighty One's eternal tyranny even more than death. As you can tell, goblins are not really big fans of Maglubiet, but they do his bidding because they really don't want to piss him off. Goblin's Lair. Goblins tend to build their lairs into the sides of mountains, into caves, into abandoned mines, or empty dungeons that have already been looted of their spoils. One of the reasons that they do this is because goblins are really known and notorious for their traps. Goblins are an intelligent and cunning creature, so you typically see them trapping in their lair and outside of their lair. The traps in their lair are meant to protect them from larger, more dangerous threats, so they typically are things that either a goblin is watching a door and they can trigger a trap, or it's something that if you're of a smaller size, the trap won't affect you. However, the traps that are outside of a goblin's lair are meant for the hunters, who typically use this for large game or for just general defense purposes to keep out any sort of unwanted visitors. Something that you will commonly find in a goblin's lair are rats and wolves. I mentioned these a moment ago that the Lashers train rats and wolves and wargs. So you typically see such creatures in a goblin's den. And rats to a goblin is kind of like a dog is to a human or an elf. They tend to be something that they use for companionship, as well as it's something that will jump to their aid if combat does arise, versus a wolf is more the equivalence to a horse, but with a little bit more of a bite to them. Spellcasters. Now, typically goblins are not spellcasters because they either don't have the skill or they really don't have the patience to learn. They are cunning-minded creatures, but it does require a little bit of a different type of skill set. Now, there are cases where you will find goblins that can cast spells, and they fall into one of two categories. The first one are casters, and the second one are wielders. So casters are ones who innately have the ability to cast spells, whether they learned it from a couple of generations of magic users in a goblin bloodline, or they were looking over a wizard's shoulder and then practiced something that they saw, or maybe it's flat out that they are someone who has wild magic. They're a sorcerer who has wild magic that they just one day woke up and they could cast Burning Hands, and that's the thing that they do, but then they have to roll a Wild Magic Surge table every single time that they cast a spell, which is really fun to just randomly have a goblin fireball his own feet and kill a whole bunch of his goblin allies. I recommend playing with that a little bit. So there are casters and there are wielders. Wielders are the ones who came across the magical item, like a wand of magic missiles or a necklace of fireballs, and they use it a few times, and then they learned how to use it. Whether or not they lost some friends or some structure along the way is something that can be fun. You maybe describe as the players are going through this cave that they see scorch marks on the walls, definitely caused by some sort of fire, and there's ruptures of rocks that are broken apart. And then later they encounter a goblin that has a necklace of fireballs, and that explains where that came from. It's kind of a neat thing to build upon. But those are goblins that don't have an innate spellcasting ability. They're just a goblin that has a wand of magic missiles. Like, that's just all they have to themselves. Now, here are a few campaign ideas that I have for a way to spice up your goblin encounters that you have in your campaigns. Now, nothing I'm going to say is like revolutionary or mind-blowing information, but it's something that whenever I hear people tell stories about their goblin encounters, or I watch YouTube videos of people that fight goblins, I usually just see goblins being used as token foot soldiers, that there's the 6 goblins and a bugbear, fight them, and that's all there is that they do with it. But goblins are a much more fascinating and interesting creature that you can really expand upon and have like short campaigns based upon, not just some sort of a random encounter machine that you can throw at your players. So I almost never see, giant rats and wolves used in like a goblin's lair, except for like the rare case of specifically in like pre-made adventures, like say Storm King's Thunder or Lost Mine of Phandelver. Then I'll see, some of these other creatures that goblins are known to have as pets. It's a part of their lore. But one of the things that I really want to see in D&D campaigns is fleshing out the aftermath. Because I commonly see stuff like, the players find a goblin den, they find a cave or a dungeon that's filled with like 20, 30 goblins, and there's a boss on the end of it, and they go in, they kill all the goblins, they kill the monsters, they kill the goblin boss, they take its loot, and they leave. But rarely is that all of the goblins that might be associated with that tribe. There might be others that come back and be like, okay, well, all of our shit's gone, all of our friends are dead, all of my family is dead, what happens now? And maybe later on in the campaign, when they go through this area again, you see goblins that are actually enslaved by orcs or hobgoblins or something like that are enslaved because they didn't have any power left. There was 30 of them. They could fight off a couple of, orcs, no problem, scare them off at the very least. But now there's 6. And so now they are actually under the boot of another creature and used as slaves for that creature. And that's a lot more interesting than just, oh yeah, you killed all the goblins, they're gone now, you don't have to worry about goblins in this cave anymore. And that's it. Like, being able to make your campaign have a little bit more flesh to it, make it have a little bit more realism, that there's consequences to everything. Even though goblins are an evil creature and you killed a whole bunch of them, there's gonna be survivors somewhere. There's not ever going to be all the goblins in the hobgoblin's den or cave or hideout or whatever. There's always going to be an aftermath where, even though they're evil creatures, something bad happened to them because of your actions that you might be like, oh, we did that. We're the reason that these goblins are slaves now. Yeah, that's awkward. And then you can maybe make a campaign idea where now you're having to fight these orcs to free these goblins or something along those lines. You can at least make the world seem more real. Like, there are actual consequences to every action, even if it's the right thing to do. You killed a whole bunch of evil creatures. But now some of the lesser people who were just part of the tribe, that were maybe some of the pariahs who were just dimwits who've really had nothing better to any of it, they really didn't do any evil deeds. They weren't entrusted to do anything. Now they're slaves, and it's all your fault. Now, as I promised you all earlier on in the video, here is a custom goblin monster stat block that you can use in your campaign. Now, the link to download this image, as well as some of those Roll20 icons that I mentioned earlier, if you happen to play Dungeons & Dragons online on Roll20.net, you can use these tokens for your goblins. Take them. They're free. There's a link in the description below that, if you click it goes to a Google Drive folder that has a whole bunch of images with this and the tokens. So if you want to go down there, click the link, download that stuff. Absolutely no charge, nothing like that. Download it, have fun. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any sort of interesting stories where you as a player or as a DM about goblins and interacting with goblins, tell me in the comment section below. I'd love to hear some interesting stories about goblins, because I never actually hear interesting stories about such a fascinating creature in Dungeons & Dragons and such a staple in pretty much every campaign that I've ever been a part of. Now, as a disclaimer, I only use information relevant to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. If there's anything from like Pathfinder or Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 or earlier or anything like that, I wasn't looking at that type of content, because I was looking at information specifically relevant to 5th edition, because that's the edition that I run all of my games in. Anything other than that, I don't really care about. So, not really of any concern to me. Now, if you enjoyed the video, like, favorite, comment, subscribe, share on social media, all that kind of fun stuff. But that's it for today. I'll see you next week. And that's it. So, Chase Taylor signing off.